Your baby isn't even yours. This test proves it, she said, waving the paper inches from my face. Her voice cut through the courtyard loud enough for every neighbor to hear. People froze, turning toward us like they'd been waiting for a show. I didn't react, not the way she wanted. I just stared at the tampered report the way a man looks at a puzzle he already knows the answer to. She didn't realize the truth was already cracking around her. And before I show you the exact moment the lab tech spotted the temperature strip mismatch, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The humiliation she tried to build was the first brick in her own downfall. He didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He simply took the paper from her hand with the steadiness of someone who refused to surrender his dignity, even under attack. Elias wasn't a man built for theatrics. He didn't raise his voice, didn't throw accusations, didn't let panic touch his features. The courtyard buzzed with whispers, but he looked past them, past Karen's smug grin, past the board members who'd tagged along like vultures sensing blood. All he saw, pressed quietly against his chest in the carrier, was Mara, his daughter, his last thread of family, his reason for breathing since the day he buried his wife. Karen's voice still echoed in the air, dripping with self-appointed authority. She loved an audience, and she'd chosen the busiest hour of the afternoon courtyard traffic. Residents returning from work, elderly couples watering potted plants, teenagers skateboarding past the HOA office, all of them stopped when they heard her. Inside him, something tightened, not anger. He didn't move fast enough for that. It was more like a wire drawn taut across years of loss and restraint, because this wasn't just about a DNA test. This was about a woman who believed she could rewrite the truth simply because she controlled the HOA sign-in sheets and neighborhood rumor mill. He pressed a hand gently against Mara's blanket as she stirred, her tiny fingers curling in sleep. Something warm and protective surged through him. She didn't understand the words thrown around her, but she would feel the energy, the threat. And he would not allow that. He studied the paper again. Not the result. He knew who his daughter was. He looked at the edges of the report, the faint crease pattern on the envelope, the way the glue along the flap pulled unevenly. It didn't match how he'd sealed it. It didn't match chain of custody standards he'd lived by for years. Small things most people wouldn't notice. But he always noticed. "You brought this on yourself," Karen added, arms folded, chin high. "An inconclusive result means we have to treat it as a mismatch. HOA bylaws are clear. Without proof of biological relation, your residency review is now pending," one of the board members finished for her, almost nervously. He could feel dozens of eyes watching, feel assumptions forming, feel the judgment settling like dust in sunlight. He had lived quietly in this community, fixing leaking pipes, repairing flickering hallway lights, helping older neighbors carry groceries. It hadn't mattered. Karen had always resented him, his modest home, his lack of deference to her position, the sympathy others gave him after his wife passed. And now she had the weapon she believed would finish him. He let the silence sit a moment longer, letting her believe she'd won the opening strike, letting the courtyard breathe with the tension she'd created. Then he lifted his gaze to her, not sharp, not emotional, just steady. Steady enough to make her shift her weight without meaning to. "This isn't the real test," he said quietly. Her eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" He didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The subtle tremor in her voice told him she'd heard exactly what he said, and exactly what he implied. He could see her recalculating, trying to assess how much he knew, trying to decide whether to push harder or retreat. Her hands tightened around the folder she'd brought, papers she planned to use as her crowning weapon. He didn't call her a liar, not yet. He didn't accuse her of touching the envelope, not yet. He simply watched her carefully, noting the way she stepped back half an inch, the way her eyes flicked toward the neighboring units, the way she realized, too late, that she'd positioned herself in front of a dozen witnesses. He felt the shift in the air as neighbors leaned closer. Their loyalty had never been to her, their curiosity would be. "Elias," one of the older neighbors whispered from behind a planter, "is everything okay?" He nodded once, calm, controlled. An engineer's mind and a father's heart working in perfect alignment. He had no proof to present today, but he had something better, patience, and an understanding of tampering patterns that Karen didn't even know existed. He tucked the paper under Mara's blanket, shielding it from the breeze. "This isn't over," Karen snapped. He didn't respond. He simply walked past her, past the board members, past the clusters of watching neighbors, toward his unit. Each step was deliberate, stabilized, certain. Behind him, the courtyard hummed with murmurs. He knew what the next hours would bring. Police questions, lab calls. A trail of evidence no amount of HOA authority could cover. Karen believed she'd embarrassed him. All she'd done was ignite a process she couldn't control. He closed his front door with a soft click, the quiet settling over him like a thin layer of dust. The courtyard noise still lingered faintly outside, whispers, shifting footsteps, the aftershock of spectacle. But inside, the apartment held nothing but the steady rhythm of Mara's breathing. He loosened the strap of the carrier, lifted her gently, and held her against his chest. The moment her cheek rested on his shirt, the tension in his shoulders eased only a little. He stood still for several seconds, letting the silence settle around her. She didn't cry. She rarely cried when he held her like this. Maybe she sensed something in him, something steady, something unmoved, something that wouldn't break even when someone tried to rip his dignity apart in front of half the neighborhood. He carried her into the living room and set her in the bassinet. The paper Karen shoved at him was still tucked under her blanket. He slid it out, smoothing its crumpled edge. The crease pattern didn't match how he'd folded it. Foam impressions on the envelope suggested pressure from something heavier than normal mail. Glue residue near the flap was from a brand he didn't use. He wasn't looking for guilt. He was cataloging facts, just like he'd done in 100 field labs before his life changed. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Not frantic, not aggressive, procedural. He exhaled slowly and opened the door. A police badge greeted him first. Officer Celine Myrock, standing with a small notepad and an expression that wasn't accusatory, just focused. Her uniform looked freshly pressed, her hair pinned tightly, her stance alert. She didn't greet him with suspicion. She greeted him with purpose. "Mr. Rowan," she said, "we need to talk about a report that came in from the diagnostics lab." He stepped aside and motioned her in. She didn't hesitate. When the door closed, her eyes drifted briefly toward Mara's bassinet. Something softened in her face, but only for a heartbeat. Then she opened her notepad. "The lab technician," she began, "noticed irregularities with the sample you submitted. Integrity strip discoloration, mismatched foam cuts, and inconsistent internal layering. He filed a formal tampering alert." Elias nodded once. He didn't look shocked, she noticed. "That reaction tells me you already suspected something," she added. "I noticed things," he answered. "Small things. Most people wouldn't." She raised a brow, studying him, like she was trying to understand how a maintenance tech recognized forensic anomalies better than the average citizen. But she didn't press, yet. Instead, she moved to the logistical part of her report. "I need to know the exact steps you took with the kit," she said, "from the moment it arrived to the moment you submitted it. Timing, handling, sealing, everything." He didn't hesitate. He recounted the sequence with clarity. When the package arrived, how he brought it inside, how he collected the sample, sealed the envelope, and left it near the door while he fed the baby. He didn't embellish, he didn't skip details. His memory was crisp, organized. She wrote rapidly. "And after sealing," she said, "did anyone else come near it?" "No," he said. "I set it on the table. Then I stepped away to settle." "Mara. And where does Karen fit into this?" He paused for only a moment. "She manages the shared mailroom racks." That was all he needed to say. The implication was obvious. Celine tapped her pen against the notepad, thinking. "The technician believes the sample was swapped, but we need a supervised retest to establish baseline truth. I've already ordered it." He felt something shift in his chest, relief mixing with dread. Though he'd expected this, hearing it confirmed meant the investigation was officially real. "We'll escort you to the clinic in the morning," she said, "and from this point on, the chain of custody will remain unbroken." He nodded again. She closed her notebook. "One more thing," she said carefully. "Most people don't catch tampering patterns like the ones you described. You've been unusually precise." "I've had experience," he said. Her gaze lingered on him, as if she could sense the weight of everything he wasn't explaining. But just as she opened her mouth to ask, Mara let out a soft whimper from the bassinet, breaking the moment. The officer's posture softened again. "She's beautiful," she murmured. He didn't reply, but his eyes did. Celine straightened. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mr. Rowan. Nothing about this situation is standard, and whoever tampered with that test didn't just commit medical fraud. They tried to weaponize it." He held her gaze, calm, grounded, unshakable. As she stepped toward the door, she paused. "By the way, if you're following along, subscribe with the bell on. You don't want to miss how this turns out." She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Elias stood in the quiet again, listening to Mara's breaths, feeling the storm building around them. But unlike Karen, unlike the rumors, unlike the paper she'd tried to use to humiliate him, the storm didn't shake him. It steadied him. He knew the path forward. He knew what tampering looked like, what sloppy hands left behind, what adhesives and detergents betrayed. And he knew, deep in the part of his mind that never forgot training, that the truth always leaves fingerprints. Tomorrow, those fingerprints would lead straight back to the person who thought she owned this community. He glanced at Mara, sleeping peacefully. "For you," he whispered quietly. Then he began preparing for what came next. Morning didn't arrive gently. It broke through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, painting across the room like a reminder that today wouldn't be ordinary. Elias had been awake long before sunrise anyway, sitting on the couch with Mara asleep on his chest. He hadn't moved much, just enough to keep her comfortable, just enough to keep his mind quietly sorting through the pieces of what awaited him. A retest, supervised, fully documented. He wasn't worried about the result. He was worried about everything Karen would try before that truth reached the surface. A soft knock came at the door right on schedule, not hurried, not dramatic, just procedural again. Officer Celine stood outside, the same focused expression, the same clipped professionalism, but this time she carried a sealed evidence box and a clipboard. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. He lifted Mara, strapped her into her carrier, and stepped outside with a steadiness that made Celine raise a brow, though she didn't comment. The morning air was crisp, carrying the hum of sprinklers and the low chatter of early walkers. It was quiet compared to yesterday's chaos. They walked across the courtyard, and as expected, blinds shifted. Curious eyes peered through narrow openings. Yesterday's humiliation had spread fast. He felt it pressing in on him, but it didn't bend him. At the end of the walkway, he noticed someone standing awkwardly near the curb, clutching a messenger bag like it might blow away. A young man with glasses, shoulders slightly hunched, hands fidgeting. Dorian Pike, the lab technician. The moment he spotted Elias, he straightened and offered a hesitant wave. Celine acknowledged him with a slight nod. You must be Mr. Rowan," Dorian said as they approached. His voice carried a mix of nerves and guilt, as though he felt personally responsible for the chaos triggered by the tampered vial. Elias didn't make him suffer. "Thank you for reporting what you saw." Dorian exhaled with visible relief. "I wasn't sure how you'd react. Some people think we're making trouble when we flag irregularities." Celine cut in. "Your report was necessary and accurate." Dorian swallowed and opened his messenger bag, pulling out a packet of printed lab logs. "I brought the full documentation. Integrity strip readings, microbubble formation, reagent discrepancies, everything that shouldn't happen with a real sample." He hesitated, then glanced at Elias. "Sir, whoever swapped the kit didn't know what they were doing. They diluted the sample with a liquid that alters protein structure. It made the layers separate." Elias nodded. "Sloppy?" Dorian blinked. "Yeah, sloppy, and it matches the description of a cleaning agent we found traces of." Celine raised a hand. "We'll discuss that once we're at the clinic. Let's keep the chain of custody clean." They moved toward the patrol vehicle parked along the curb. No lights, no theatrics. Just enough official presence to send whispers rippling along the row of units. Karen's curtains twitched as they passed. Elias didn't look at her window, but he felt her watching, felt her calculating. She wasn't worried about the truth. She was worried about losing control. At the clinic, a receptionist buzzed them into a private wing, normally reserved for complex cases or high-profile clients who needed anonymity. Today, it hosted a man who only wanted to protect his child. The door shut behind them. Everything felt sterile and still. Dorian set up the kit on a steel table, his hands steadying as he entered his professional zone. Celine logged timestamps, photographed each step, and secured the evidence box in a corner. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. Elias leaned over Mara's carrier and spoke to her in a tone she responded to instinctively. Even half asleep, she quieted under his voice. He collected the sample, sealed it properly, and handed it to Dorian, who inspected every angle meticulously. "This is perfect," Dorian murmured. He logged the sample, placed it inside a temperature-controlled case, and snapped the latch closed. Celine immediately recorded the seal numbers. The moment the latch clicked, something shifted in the room. The truth was now documented, protected, untouchable. Dorian cleared his throat. "Mr. Rowan, I hope you know this isn't common. We don't often see tampering this deliberate." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "And I don't think it was random." Celine gave him a warning look, but he pressed on. "There were fingerprints on the foam insert, not yours, not from our lab, partial but consistent. And the adhesive residue, same brand used on HOA mailroom bulletin boards. That landed heavier than the rest." Celine stepped forward. "We'll verify everything before taking action. But the information is helpful." Dorian nodded, then looked at Elias with something like respect. "Most people panic when they get an inconclusive result. You didn't. You just saw it." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Celine spoke again, her tone firm. "We'll have preliminary results in 24 hours. After that, we confront the HOA." Elias lifted Mara from her carrier, holding her close. She yawned, tiny fingers clutching his collar. The weight of her felt grounding, like she was anchoring him in everything that mattered. He walked toward the exit, sunlight spilling through the glass doors. Today wasn't victory, but it was forward motion, and Karen, watching from her scripted world of rules and authority, had no idea that the smallest pieces she overlooked would unravel everything she'd built. He stepped outside, breathing in the sharp air. Tomorrow, the truth would surface. And it would be loud. The sunlight outside the clinic was harsher than before, almost too bright for the heaviness in Elias's chest. He adjusted Mara's carrier strap and walked toward the patrol vehicle with Celine beside him. The retest was done. The evidence was sealed. The process was officially moving, but he knew Karen would not sit quietly while the truth gathered weight against her. Celine opened the passenger door. "We'll drop you home. I need to file the initial chain of custody confirmation before noon." He nodded. He didn't say much on the ride back. He rarely did. But his silence wasn't empty. It was measured, controlled. His mind had always worked that way. First collect, then assess, then act. The difference now was that somebody had dragged his child into a war she didn't deserve. When the patrol car rolled into Brookstone Heights, he felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. More blinds tilted, more heads turned subtly. Karen's spectacle from yesterday had spread like wildfire, and today's escort only fueled curiosity. Celine noticed. "She's watching." He didn't need to look to know which window she meant. He stepped out, lifted Mara from her seat, and thanked Celine with a quiet nod. The officer gave him one final look, something between respect and caution, before driving off. He turned toward his building. Karen was already waiting. She stood near the mailroom door, arms crossed, tapping her foot as if rehearsing indignation. She didn't smile, but her eyes gleamed with a poisonous satisfaction. "So," she said, pretending to be casual, "police escort, huh? Must be serious." He walked past her without breaking stride. She followed. "Funny how things escalate when people have something to hide." Her tone was light, but the words landed sharp. A couple walking a dog slowed just enough to listen. He didn't stop. He didn't give her the reaction she wanted. He simply reached for his apartment door when she spoke again, louder this time, enough to carry. "You should have been honest from the start, Elias. You should have admitted that child isn't yours." He paused then, not because her words hit him, but because he felt Mara shift in her sling. Something in her tiny movement reminded him why he couldn't allow Karen's lies to stand unchecked. He turned his head slightly. "You don't know anything about her?" Karen scoffed. "I know enough. Inconclusive means mismatch. HOA policies are clear." He finally faced her fully, calm, steady. The same unshakable demeanor that unnerved her yesterday. "You don't get to twist science to fit your agenda," he said, her eyes narrowed. "Agenda? You think I'm scared of you? Of a maintenance tech who's hiding something big enough to require police involvement? A door opened somewhere above them, curtains shifted. Someone pretended to water a plant just to be within earshot. And still, he didn't raise his voice. "You should stop while you can," he said quietly. Her laugh was sharp. "Is that a threat?" "No," he said. "A prediction." She stiffened, expecting him to say more, but he walked inside and closed the door before she could fire another shot. Inside, Mara let out a soft sound, as though sensing the tension he tried to shield her from. He kissed the top of her head and set her gently in her bassinet before sinking into the chair beside it. Karen thought volume equaled victory. She always had. But volume only exposed her desperation, and desperation left patterns, mistakes to trace. He didn't have long to think before his phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. He answered. "Mr. Rowan, it was, Dorian. I'm sorry to call you directly. I just got something you need to know." Elias straightened in the chair. "Go ahead. After you left, I ran a few additional scans. The dilution agent we found in the swapped sample, it's a match to a solvent mixture used in your HOA mailroom. A very specific ratio." Elias didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. He simply let Dorian continue. "We also lifted a partial fingerprint off the foam insert. Not enough for a full identification, but the pattern indicates a narrower fingertip width. Statistically, more likely female." A quiet beat. A breath. "And one more thing," Dorian added, voice dropping. "There was glitter embedded in the adhesive. Pink glitter. It's not a lab contaminant. It's from a craft glue type commonly sold for decorative use." And suddenly everything clicked. Karen's clipboard, her color-coded binders, her glitter-labeled HOA rulebooks, her obsession with appearances, right down to her office supplies. Dorian exhaled shakily. "I'm submitting this to Officer Myrak now, but I thought you should hear it first." "Thank you," Elias said. He hung up, sat back. Let the information settle. Karen hadn't just made a mistake. She'd stamped her arrogance directly onto the crime scene. He looked at Mara, small, peaceful, unaware. He wasn't vengeful by nature. He wasn't the type to chase wars. He'd lived enough of those in his past life. He wanted quiet, stability, safety. But when a person tries to strip you of your child, your home, and your truth, quiet becomes a weapon. He stood, walked to the kitchen counter, and pulled out the tampered test envelope he'd examined the night before. With the new information Dorian provided, the inconsistencies aligned like puzzle pieces falling into place. Karen thought she could humiliate him into retreat. She didn't realize humiliation was a spark, and she'd lit it with her own hands. He placed the envelope beside Mara's formula bottle and whispered, "This ends soon. Tomorrow the lab would call. And after that, there would be no place for Karen to hide." The apartment was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that sits heavy on the air, charged, waiting, knowing something is about to break open. Elias stood at the counter for a long moment, the tampered envelope in front of him like an open challenge. Mara slept in her bassinet, her tiny breath soft and rhythmic, grounding him with every rise and fall of her chest. He picked up the envelope again, held it at eye level. Yesterday these details were suspicions. Now, after Dorian's call, they were confirmations. Pink glitter embedded in the adhesive, a cleaning agent only stocked in the HOA's storage room. Fingerprints too small to match him. No speculation, no reaching. A pattern of interference unmistakably tied to Karen's world. He slid the envelope into a clear protective sleeve and sealed it. He knew enough about chain of custody to treat this with the respect of evidence, because soon that's exactly what it would become. His phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID was one he recognized, the clinic. He answered immediately. "Mr. Rowan, this is diagnostics. The preliminary supervised retest has processed faster than expected." He didn't breathe. "And the result is conclusive. Your daughter is a biological match. No doubt, no anomaly." His hand tightened slightly around the edge of the counter, not from surprise, from confirmation, from knowing this truth was always unwavering. Only the world around it had been manipulated. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We'll send Officer Myrak the sealed verification. She should contact you shortly." He ended the call and looked toward Mara, sleeping without a care in the world. His daughter. Unquestionably. Undeniably. Always. He didn't smile, but something eased inside him that had been coiled since Karen first shoved lies into the courtyard air. Another knock came at the door. 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. Not Karen, not a neighbor, police rhythm. He opened the door to find Officer Celine, standing with a thin folder under her arm. She stepped inside at his nod, her gaze briefly settling on the bassinet before returning to him. "We have the preliminary confirmation," she said, holding out the sealed document. "The supervised test leaves no room for dispute." He accepted it, placing the envelope beside the first, truth and tampering sitting together. "But that's not the only reason I came," she added, lowering her voice. "The lab sent over the supplemental evidence logs." She set the folder on the counter and opened it. "There's adhesive glitter," she began. "Pink, identical to the decorative glue Karen Belford uses on HOA signage and rule handouts. 4 residents confirmed she's the only one who uses that brand." He nodded slowly. "There's also the cleaning solvent match. The chemical ratio is unique to the mixture used only in the HOA mailroom and the HOA office storage closet. It's very specific." He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. "And finally, the partial fingerprint. Not enough for a courtroom identification, but the pattern is narrow, statistically consistent with a woman, combined with the other evidence. It narrows the field." She closed the folder. "Mr. Rowan, I'm informing you ahead of the formal report. This isn't going away quietly. There will be an HOA meeting in 2 days. Karen intends to use it to push for an emergency residency vote." He exhaled once, long, slow, controlled. He'd expected this. "She doesn't know what we have," Celine continued, "and normally I'd tell you to avoid the meeting. But in this case, you need to be there." He looked at Mara again, then back at the officer. "I will." Celine studied him for a moment, the faintest sign of admiration in her eyes. Not for aggression, not for bravado, for steadiness. "You don't rattle easily," she said. "I can't afford to," he answered. She gave a short nod. "I'll update you when the full analysis comes in." When she left, the apartment fell silent again. But this time, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was intentional, purposeful, like the air itself was shifting in his favor. Elias sat on the couch and opened the supervised test result. The bold, clear match stared back at him. Simple, irrefutable truth. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something deeper. The reminder that protecting Mara wasn't just instinct. It was duty. It was promise. It was the last vow he'd made to her mother. He leaned back, closing his eyes for just a moment, letting the finality of the result settle in his bones. He could feel the next steps forming in his mind. Not reckless, not emotional, but strategic. Karen had played loudly. Now it was time for precision. His phone vibrated again, this time with a text notification from a neighbor he barely knew. "Heard there's going to be a big meeting. You okay?" He didn't respond, but he read it twice. People were watching. People were choosing sides. People were realizing what Karen had done. The public stage was forming, just like victory strategy, there for 3 required. Exposure required witnesses. Her arrogance had already supplied them. He stood and walked back to the counter, running his thumb along the edge of the tampered envelope's protective sleeve. She thought glitter and authority made her untouchable. She'd learned what meticulous truth could do. He picked up Mara, cradling her gently, whispering against her hair. "This is the last time she'll breathe lies into our lives." The evidence was ready, the truth was ready, and soon Karen would face the reality she'd tried to twist. He held Mara a little longer before laying her back in the bassinet, her tiny hand curling around his thumb like she was anchoring him to the moment. The confirmation test sat on the counter beside the tampered one, truth and sabotage, side by side. He stared at them for a quiet breath, knowing the next 24 hours would determine how the rest of this unfolded. The official report was coming. The HOA meeting was coming. And Karen, armed with arrogance, ignorance, and a glitter trail she didn't realize she left behind, was about to collide with reality. He wasn't rushing into anything. He'd learned a long time ago that timing mattered more than force. Acting too early made you sloppy. Acting too late made you irrelevant. His phone vibrated again, an email from the clinic's automated system. Integrity analysis report, complete. He opened it, scanning the words with practiced precision, The report detailed everything: reagent inconsistency, protein destabilization, solvent traces, foreign adhesive particles, irregular foam compression marks. All of it pointed to tampering, not by a professional, but by someone with just enough confidence to think they were smarter than the system. Someone like her. He exported the report, printed a courtesy copy, and placed it with the others. A growing portfolio of truth. As he sat back down, a sudden sharp clang echoed from outside, metal against metal. He instinctively stiffened, not out of fear, but out of vigilance. Years of training didn't disappear. They just buried themselves until needed. He stepped to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain. Karen was dragging a trash bin toward the curb. Normally, she wouldn't touch something so mundane. She had a 14-year-old assistant for that. But today she seemed deliberately positioned, loud, visible, trying too hard to look unbothered. She cast quick glances toward his unit, as if checking whether he noticed her. Her movements carried the tension of someone preparing for fallout, but pretending they weren't. She was nervous. He didn't celebrate that. He simply noted it. He stepped away from the window and checked on Mara again, still asleep. He placed a soft blanket across her and exhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment to absorb the stillness before another knock disrupted it. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Not police, not a neighbor. A pattern meant to get attention without signaling a threat. He opened the door. Dorian stood outside, eyes wide, hair slightly disheveled, shirt wrinkled like he'd been pulling at it in the car. He clutched his messenger bag against his side. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped aside. The moment Dorian entered, he began pacing. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "Protocol says I shouldn't, but I needed to tell you something in person." Elias didn't interrupt him. Silence had a way of coaxing the truth out. Dorian finally stopped pacing and opened his bag, pulling out something wrapped in tissue. He unfolded it with shaky hands. It was the foam insert from the original DNA kit, the one used to secure the vial. I pulled this before it went into disposal," Dorian said. "Not because I wanted to break rules, but because the pattern bothered me." He held it out. Elias accepted it carefully. Dorian pointed to a series of indentations along the foam. "Those aren't made by a lab technician. They're made by fingernails. Someone with long acrylics pressed the vial into place. We checked all the female lab staff. No match." Elias lifted the foam closer. The indentations were small, consistent, angled inward. Someone gripping too tightly. Someone inexperienced. Someone panicking. Dorian swallowed. "And the glitter?" The lab spectrometer picked up something else in the adhesive. A fragrance oil, berry vanilla. It's not used in any commercial lab glue, but it's commonly added to craft adhesive sold in hobby stores. He paused, looking at the floor. "That fragrance is the same one used on the HOA flyers in your neighborhood. A resident brought one in when asking about community blood drives. It was identical." The last puzzle piece slipped into place with quiet inevitability. Karen's glitter glue wasn't just decoration, it was evidence. Dorian's voice softened. "I know you're not just some maintenance guy. I don't know what you did before this, but you see things the way analysts do. I figured you'd want the physical piece before the police formally collect it." Elias set the foam on the counter beside the 2 envelopes. The collection was becoming a mosaic of her mistakes. "You didn't have to risk your job for this," he said. "I know," Dorian answered, voice trembling with sincerity. "But what she did was wrong, and you deserve someone to say it out loud." Elias nodded once, a small, meaningful acknowledgement that conveyed more than words. Before Dorian could leave, there was another knock, this one harder, angrier, echoing through the unit like a threat wrapped in politeness. Karen's voice carried through the door, sharp, loud, forced, cheerful. "Elias, we need to talk about the HOA meeting agenda." Dorian froze. His face paled. Elias didn't look shaken. He didn't even turn quickly. He simply moved to the door with the quiet calm of someone who'd faced bigger dangers than a power-drunk neighbor. He opened it a fraction. Karen stood there with her glitter-labeled clipboard, smile stretched thin. "I heard you've been busy," she said. Elias didn't answer. She tilted her head. You know, it's not great for the community when people stir up false accusations. Behind him, Dorian stepped further into the kitchen, out of sight. His breath hitched. Elias kept his gaze on her, unmoved. "You should stop," he said quietly. Her smile flickered. Then, for the first time, he saw fear flash across her eyes. She knew something had shifted. She just didn't yet know how badly. He closed the door before she could recover her voice. Inside, the room fell silent, and the truth tightened its grip around her. The door clicked shut, sealing out Karen's brittle smile and the sharp scent of her perfume that always seemed to linger a second too long. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with realization. Dorian exhaled shakily from the kitchen, pressing a hand to his forehead as if he'd just sprinted a mile. "She's right outside," he whispered. "If she knew I was here, she won't," Elias said calmly. He wasn't guessing. He'd watched Karen's eyes before closing the door. She hadn't been looking past him. She hadn't sensed another presence. She was too focused on holding her narrative together, too panicked to search for cracks. Dorian edged toward the bassinet, lowering his voice even further when he saw Mara's tiny form. "She's really pushing, isn't she?" "She always pushes when she's losing control," Elias answered. He lifted the foam insert again, examining it under the kitchen light. The indentations, the glitter flakes, the faint scent of berry vanilla, all of it tied her to the crime more securely than any direct admission. Dorian adjusted his glasses. "I'll hand everything to Officer Myrak this afternoon. They'll log it before the HOA meeting." He paused, then added with more courage than before, "She doesn't stand a chance if this gets presented." Elias didn't nod, didn't celebrate. He wasn't built for premature victory. He measured outcomes only once they were final. "You should go out the back," Elias said softly. "No need to cross her path." Dorian hesitated only a second before nodding, gathering his bag and sliding toward the rear door. Before disappearing, he looked back once. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "She picked the wrong person to mess with." When the door shut behind him, Elias returned to Mara. She was awake now, blinking up at him, stretching one small hand toward him. He scooped her up, holding her close, letting her warmth anchor him against the storm outside. He whispered, "We're getting closer." As if on cue, there was another knock. But this time, it wasn't urgent. It was gentle, almost hesitant. He opened the door to find an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dunley, standing there with her gardening hat still on. She held a small ceramic pot with a blooming violet. "I saw that woman bothering you again," she said bluntly. "And I've lived here long enough to know she's done something she shouldn't have." He blinked once in quiet acknowledgement. She glanced down at Mara, her stern expression softening. "You take care of that baby better than anyone I've ever seen. Don't let her scare you." "I won't," he said simply. She nodded once, firmly, as if sealing an agreement. "Good. And if they hold that meeting tomorrow, I'll be there. People need to see what she's become." It wasn't much, but it mattered. Witnesses mattered. Consistent with victory strategy number 3, the crowd wasn't simply forming, it was shifting. After she left, he placed the violet on the dining table and began preparing a small bottle for Mara. While warming the formula, he glanced at the growing pile of evidence on the counter. Karen still thought of herself as untouchable. She didn't know how much of her mess had already leaked into the open. She didn't know that every moment she tried to intimidate him only sharpened the case building around her. His phone buzzed, a text from Celine. "Full analysis ready. Need to meet ASAP. Can you come to the station in 1 hour?" He texted back, "Yes." He fed Mara, held her until her eyes fluttered shut again, then placed her gently in the bassinet. When he walked out with the diaper bag slung over his shoulder and her carrier in hand, the courtyard was a still frame, quiet but laced with tension. A couple of neighbors nodded at him. Not pity, not suspicion. Solidarity. He reached his car, buckled Mara in, and drove to the station without music. The quiet helped him think. Inside, Officer Myrak was waiting by the front desk, a thick folder in her hand. Her expression was more serious than before. "This is everything," she said, guiding him to a private room. "The retest, the tampering report, the adhesive analysis, the solvent match, the partial fingerprint, even a neighbor's statement about glitter on HOA flyers." She set the folder in front of him. "We're preparing to present this at tomorrow's meeting," she continued, "but I need your permission to disclose the full findings publicly." He didn't hesitate. Do it. She nodded. Good. Because Karen's arranging her own agenda for the meeting, making herself look like she's protecting the community. He didn't react. But she doesn't know, Celine added, her voice low, that her own mistakes are about to shut her down. He glanced at Mara's carrier beside him. She had fallen asleep again. A small, peaceful reminder of why all of this mattered. Will the HOA try to suppress the findings? He asked. Celine smiled faintly, not amused, but confident. Not when I'm standing in front of them, and not when half the community already suspects something's off. She slid one final document toward him. The HOA rules allow residents to speak at the meeting. You might want to use that. He looked at her. I will, he said. As he left the station, folder tucked securely under his arm, he felt the weight of truth settling into place, solid, unshakable. Tomorrow wasn't just a meeting. It was the moment everything shifted. He strapped Mara into her seat, closed the car door gently, and breathed in once before starting the engine. Karen wanted to use the HOA rules to choke him out. She didn't realize those same rules would be the rope she tied around herself. He drove back into Brookstone Heights with the folder on the passenger seat, the weight of it heavier than its paper should allow. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, stretching thin across the pavement like the quiet tension running through the neighborhood. Tomorrow's meeting was only hours away, and the pieces were already aligning, truth tightening like a noose around the person who'd tried to weaponize a child. He parked, stepped out, and gently lifted Mara's carrier from the back seat. She stirred but didn't wake, her tiny fingers curling toward his shirt like she always did when she sensed movement. He breathed in slowly, grounding himself. Everything he'd done, every silent step, every careful choice, was for her. As he walked toward his building, a neighbor who usually avoided him lingered near the walkway. A man in his 40s, always polite but distant. Today he nodded. Big day tomorrow, he said quietly. Elias didn't break stride. It is. The man hesitated, then added, a lot of us will be there. A small acknowledgement, not a declaration, but meaningful. Victory strategy, number 3, required witnesses. They were forming on their own. Inside the apartment, he placed the folder on the table, beside the evidence he'd already collected. Foam insert, adhesive sample, both test envelopes. Everything lined up like a timeline he could trace with his eyes closed. He unbuckled Mara from her carrier, held her against his chest, and walked around the room in silence. She blinked up at him dreamily, her world uncomplicated, untouched by the layers of adult malice surrounding her. The calm she gave him steadied his pulse. Another buzz from his phone interrupted the quiet. A text from the HOA group chat, one Karen controlled with an iron grip. Mandatory attendance. Emergency meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. Topic: community safety concerns and resident misconduct. Her language was precise, manipulative, designed to guide opinion before the meeting even began. He sat down, opening the group notifications. Comments were already rolling in. Is this about that dad? He had police at his place again. Karen said the lab flagged something weird. I'm hearing mixed things. Better wait. Elias didn't comment. He never did. He let the noise swirl around him while he stayed centered. He placed Mara gently in her bassinet, kissed her head, and turned back to the table. He opened the folder, rereading the summary Myrak had highlighted. Tampering confirmed. Adhesive contaminant identified. Solvent trace matched to HOA storage. Partial fingerprint, statistically consistent with a female. Retest, conclusive biological match. A perfect storm of truth. He heard footsteps in the hallway, not random ones, slow, measured, stopping in front of his door. Then a knock, not aggressive, not Karen. He opened it carefully. Officer Myrak stood there, holding a sealed zip pouch. Final evidence package, she said. This is what I'll present tomorrow. He accepted it, fingers brushing the cool plastic. You'll want to be early, she added. Karen's planning to corner the narrative as soon as the meeting starts. He nodded. I figured. She's also requested extra board members for support, but that works in your favor. More witnesses, he said. She smiled faintly. Exactly. She lingered, eyes flicking past him to the table stacked with evidence. You ready for this? Yes. And your daughter? He glanced at the bassinet. She'll stay with a neighbor during the meeting. Good. She tapped the folder lightly. Because tomorrow's going to be loud. When she left, the apartment settled into a quieter tension. He stood there for a few seconds, absorbing the weight of the coming hours. This wasn't fear. It was preparation, alignment, precision. He gathered the evidence, placed each item into the police-issued pouch, sealed it with a clean strip, and set it aside. Then he walked to the hallway closet, retrieving a plain black bag he hadn't touched since leaving the military. Not because it held weapons, because it held discipline. Inside was a small, worn notebook filled with diagrams, incident logs, chain of custody templates, and forensic checklists he'd once used daily. He flipped through the pages slowly, not needing them, but wanting the reminder, the structure, the clarity. It brought him back to who he was before the quiet life, before the loss, before the single-dad routine became his new world. He was never just a maintenance technician. He simply chose that piece. But when circumstances demanded precision, he still had it. As night pressed in through the windows, the complex grew more restless. Doors shut. Voices rose, then fell. Karen's high-pitched orders drifted faintly across the courtyard as she prepared her army of board members. He closed his notebook and returned it to the bag. Mara stirred again, her soft cry pulling him instantly back to her side. He lifted her, rocking gently. Her small hand grasped the collar of his shirt, tiny and certain. "You're my truth," he whispered. She nestled against him, unaware of how fiercely he meant it. A final message pinged on his phone, this time from an unfamiliar number. "People are starting to doubt her. Tomorrow's your moment. Don't hold back." No name, but he didn't need one. The shift was already happening. Tomorrow, the truth wouldn't whisper. It would echo. And Karen, armed with glitter, lies, and arrogance, would learn exactly how loud consequences could be. The message on his phone glowed for a long moment before the screen dimmed, but Elias didn't need to reread it. The shift was already happening. He felt it in the air, in the subtle glances from neighbors, in the tightening pattern of questions circling Karen's behavior. Every move she made now created more tension, more suspicion, more cracks. Morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of sky that made everything seem sharper. He fed Mara, changed her, and held her for a while in the quiet before the day unfolded. Today wasn't just another skirmish, it was the threshold. The HOA meeting would decide everything. He placed her gently back into the bassinet, her eyes fluttering shut again. Her calmness always grounded him. He whispered, "I'll be right back," even though she couldn't understand. But somehow he knew she sensed the promise. He packed the evidence pouch into a plain folder, nothing flashy, nothing that announced its weight. Then he grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The courtyard had never felt so alive with unspoken tension. Groups of neighbors murmured softly. Kids rode their scooters slower than usual, and even dogs seemed unsettled. Word had spread. Something big was coming. As he passed the mailroom, a neighbor he barely knew stopped watering her plants long enough to say, "We're rooting for you." He nodded. Once, that was enough. He made his way to the community hall early, just like Celine advised. The door was propped open, board members moving inside like performers rehearsing for a show. Karen stood at the front, clipboard under her arm, speaking with exaggerated confidence. She laughed too loudly, smiled too widely, tried too hard. She hadn't seen him yet. He stepped inside quietly, choosing a seat near the center. Not back row observer, not front row challenger. A place intentionally visible. A few neighbors nodded to him. Their expressions weren't uncertain anymore. They were waiting. 10 minutes later, Officer Myrak entered. The shift in the room was instant. Conversations died. Karen's smile faltered. Even the board members straightened, unsure what this meant. Celine scanned the room and gave a simple nod toward Elias. A signal, nothing more. But Karen noticed. Her posture stiffened like she'd been struck. She approached him with the kind of forced warmth that cracked under her own weight. "Elias," she said, too loudly again. "Glad you could join." He turned just enough to acknowledge her. Not aggressive, not fearful, just steady. "It's mandatory," he said. A few residents snickered softly behind raised hands. Karen flushed. She leaned closer, voice dropping. "Let's keep things civil tonight. People don't need theatrics." He didn't move. Then don't create any. Her jaw tightened. I'm not the one causing problems here. He didn't reply. Karen spun around sharply and walked toward the front of the room, clipboard clutched tight. A small pink glitter smear glinted under the overhead light. He almost smiled at the bitter irony. Minutes later, the hall filled completely. Seats packed, people lined the walls, some watched from the doorway. The board members took their seats at the front, all looking stiff, unsure how to navigate the pressure building around them. Karen cleared her throat and tapped the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this emergency HOA meeting. Tonight, we will address serious concerns regarding community safety and resident misconduct, specifically surrounding Mr. Rowan. She motioned toward him dramatically. Theatrics, exactly as he predicted. Murmurs spread through the room, some skeptical, some weary, some annoyed. She continued, voice dripping with self-importance. We recently received concerning reports regarding a falsified DNA test submitted by Mr. Rowan, an attempt to misrepresent custodial legitimacy. A few people frowned. Several more looked confused. One person whispered, "But I thought the police—" Karen cut over the noise. "This isn't about drama, it's about truth and safety and rules." It was almost impressive how confidently she lied. Almost. She opened her glitter-labeled binder, flipping papers theatrically. Her hands trembled slightly. "We are obligated to review his residency due to these questionable actions. For the safety of this community, we must discuss whether—" "Sit down!" The voice didn't come from Elias. It came from Officer Myrak, standing now with a folder in her hand. Karen froze. Every head turned. "I'm sorry," Karen said with a brittle laugh, "but officers don't—" "Sit down," Myrak repeated. Karen's face drained of color. She lowered herself slowly. Myrak stepped forward. "I will speak now, and everyone will listen." The room stilled. "Mr. Rowan did not falsify anything," she said. "In fact, he submitted a supervised test. The conclusive results were delivered to me directly." She lifted the folder. "The child is his biological daughter." Gasps scattered across the room. Someone whispered, "I knew it." Karen's mouth fell open. Her panic leaked through her perfectly managed posture. "That's impossible. The first test was tampered with." Myrak's voice cut like steel. "We have laboratory confirmation of adhesive contamination, solvent traces matching your HOA storage room, and glitter particles identical to the decorative glue you use." Karen's hands jerked. The glitter on her clipboard suddenly seemed neon. "And," Myrak added, "partial fingerprints consistent with a woman. Combined with the solvent match and adhesive analysis, the evidence forms a pattern." Karen shot up from her seat. "This is slander. You can't accuse me with—" "I'm not accusing," Myrak said. "I'm presenting findings." She nodded toward Elias. "Mr. Rowan, you have the floor." He stood, calm, controlled, unshakable, exactly the opposite of the woman unraveling in front of the entire community. Every eye turned to him. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight brought truth. And Karen Belford had nowhere left to hide. He rose slowly, not rushing, not basking in attention, just standing with the quiet certainty of a man who'd already lived through far worse than judgmental stares. The community hall fell into a thick, anticipatory silence. Even the air seemed to pause. Mara's blanket, tucked in the crook of his arm as he'd carried her earlier, still rested in his jacket pocket, a small reminder of what this all truly centered around. He stepped to the front of the room. Karen's breath hitched audibly. She was standing rigid, eyes wide, hands trembling so hard her clipboard rattled softly against her leg. He looked at the residents first, not at her, not at the board, at the families, the couples, the people who'd once believed her every word, people who'd watched him push strollers, fix broken walkway lights, help carry groceries. And now we're seeing something else, calm strength, not the quiet anonymity they once assigned him. He placed the folder on the lectern. "When the first test came back inconclusive," he began, voice steady, "I didn't panic because I knew the truth. I knew who my daughter was. I didn't need a paper to tell me." Several residents nodded, a few murmured in agreement. "But someone here saw that result as an opportunity," he continued. "Not for the community, not for safety, but for control." Karen stiffened. "You're twisting—" Officer Myrak's gaze snapped to her. She shut her mouth instantly. Elias opened the folder, lifting out the tampered envelope. He held it with gloved hands, demonstrating respect for evidence, not theatrics. "This," he said, "is the envelope that held the swapped sample. The lab's integrity analysis shows manipulated adhesive, foam indentations made by acrylic nails, and contamination from a berry vanilla scented glitter glue not used in any medical setting." He paused, not for effect, but to let the weight of truth land. "Glue used on HOA flyers," he added. A ripple went through the room. Heads turned toward Karen instinctively. He set the envelope down. "The second envelope," he continued, lifting the supervised test packet, "was taken directly under observation at the clinic. No interference, no contamination, no chance for anyone to touch it." He placed it beside the first. And the result was clear. 100% biological match between me and my daughter. A small sound escaped Karen, part gasp, part denial. One of the board members leaned away from her, as if distancing himself from a sinking ship. Elias looked at her now, not with anger or triumph, but something colder, steadier, the look of a man who had seen lies used as weapons before and refused to bend under them. "You tried to weaponize doubt," he said quietly. "You tried to take away my home, my stability, and my daughter's legitimacy because you thought no one would question you." Karen's face flushed crimson. This is all fabricated. He's making this up with... Glitter doesn't lie." A woman in the audience muttered loudly. Laughter broke out, not mocking him, but her. The tide had finally turned. Officer Myrak stepped forward. "For the record, our forensic report is complete. All findings point to deliberate tampering by someone with access to the HOA's storage and mail distribution. Evidence will be handed over to investigators after this meeting." Karen stumbled back a step, her heel catching on the leg of a folding chair. A board member tried to steady her, but she jerked away, breathing fast. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Karen," he said, "you tried to use a child to win a power struggle." Her eyes darted everywhere except him. "You wanted to humiliate me in public," he continued, but the truth surfaced, because truth always does. Someone from the back called out, "We trusted you, Karen. What did you do?" Another voice shouted, "She used glitter glue on the evidence." More outrage rippled through the hall. Karen's mask finally cracked. I was only trying to protect this community from a father raising his child," another resident snapped. "From your own insecurity," someone else added. She turned toward the board, desperate. "You believe me, right? You know I wouldn't." But the board president shook his head slowly. "Karen, this is beyond us now." Her face crumpled. She wasn't used to losing control, especially not publicly. Officer Myrak cleared her throat. "Effective immediately, Karen Belford is suspended from all HOA duties pending a full investigation. She is not to access any community documents, mail rooms, or storage facilities." Karen's voice broke into a strangled sound. "You can't do this." "I can," Myrak replied, "and I am." The room erupted, not with chaos, but with clarity. People began speaking all at once. Shock, frustration, validation, years of quiet resentment toward her tone, her power, her arbitrary rules spilled into the air like water breaking through a dam. Through it all, Elias remained still. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who'd protected what mattered most. Karen's gaze finally snapped to him, a mix of fear, rage, and disbelief. You think you've won?" He didn't answer her. He simply looked toward Mara's empty carrier at his side. Then he said the only words that mattered. "This was never about winning. It was about stopping you." She froze. In that moment, the last of her authority shattered, not from force, but from the quiet certainty of a father who refused to be broken. Tonight was exposure. Tomorrow would be consequences. And Karen Belford had no shield left between herself and the truth she tried so hard to bury. For several long seconds after his final words, the community hall held an almost sacred stillness. Not silence, because silence is empty. This was full, heavy. A collective breath held between the fall of one truth and the rise of another. Karen's eyes flicked wildly around the room, searching for someone, anyone to anchor her collapsing authority. No one moved, no one offered a hand, not even the board members who once echoed every directive she gave. Elias stood where he was, posture steady, gaze calm. He didn't chase the moment, he didn't revel in it. He simply existed in it, with the quiet, frightening certainty of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. Then the room broke open. Residents began speaking all at once. I knew something was off the moment she started talking. She tried to write me up for chalk drawings. Chalk! She banned my kid's skateboard but let her nephew ride his. She told me I had to repaint my door 3 times. Every complaint, every frustration, every small injustice she had brushed off for years spilled out as if someone finally cracked the lid on a pressure valve. The noise swelled, not chaotic, but liberated. People were no longer afraid of her. Karen lifted her hands desperately. Everyone, stop! You don't understand. But she no longer had a microphone, and even if she did, no one would have listened. Officer Myrak raised a hand. Settle down, let's keep order. The room quieted, but the shift remained. No one looked at Karen as a leader anymore. They looked at her as someone revealed. Karen swallowed hard. You're all being manipulated. He planned this. He didn't plan your glitter trail, a resident snapped. Laughter burst through the room. Color drained from Karen's face. Elias finally closed the folder in front of him, sliding the last page into place. This isn't about humiliation, he said, voice carrying across the room without effort. It's about a pattern you've built over years. You use control like a weapon. You crossed a line when you came after my daughter. Karen flinched at the word daughter, as if the reminder cut deeper than facts. He stepped back from the lectern, no theatrics, just intention. The community deserves better than fear disguised as leadership. Officer Myrak stepped forward again. The suspension stands. Karen, you are to attend an official interview tomorrow morning regarding evidence tampering. You will not interfere with any part of this investigation. Understood? Karen shook her head frantically. You don't have proof. We have everything we need, Myrak replied, calm but unyielding. And your reaction tonight confirms more than you realize. That broke something in Karen. She stumbled back, collapsing into her chair as if her legs refused to hold her weight. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor, scattering glitter across the tile in a small, humiliating constellation. A boy sitting near the front whispered, "She even sparkles when she falls." The adults tried not to laugh. Some failed. The board president cleared his throat, visibly struggling to regain some form of structure. We need to vote on immediate administrative action. But he didn't look at Karen when he said it. He looked at Elias. In light of the evidence presented and the officer's findings, we move to condemn the tampering, reverse any citations placed against Mr. Rowan, and enact temporary restructuring of the HOA's leadership. A chorus of agreement rippled through the board. Karen slammed her palms onto the table. You can't do this without me. The board president sighed. We're doing this because of you. Another wave of murmurs. Elias stepped back toward his seat, quietly picking up Mara's blanket from his jacket pocket. He held it in his hand, running his thumb over the soft fabric. A simple thing, but it grounded him more than anything else in the room. Neighbors approached him one by one. You deserve justice. She shouldn't have gone after a baby. If you need help tomorrow, we'll be there. Officer Myrak approached beside him. You handled yourself well, she said softly. Most people would have shouted. You didn't. I didn't need to, he replied. The truth speaks loudly enough, she agreed. Karen suddenly lunged up from her chair. You're all fools, she screamed. He's manipulating you with a baby and a sad face. You think he's some hero? He's no one, and I will not let him destroy everything I've built. Elias turned toward her, not in challenge, but in quiet, devastating clarity. You destroyed it yourself, he said. It landed harder than shouting ever could. Her expression broke into something brittle, something fractured beyond repair. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll find someone who'll listen, someone who'll take my side. Myrak crossed her arms. The only person listening to you next will be an investigator. The board members, residents, and Myrak all watched Karen, but Karen watched only him, like she finally saw what she'd never bothered to look for. A man who didn't bluff. A man who didn't break. A man who had nothing left to lose except the one thing she failed to destroy. His daughter. Elias lifted the blanket, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his pocket again. "It's over," he said. This time, no one disagreed. As the meeting dissolved, people filing out in clusters of whispered relief, Karen remained frozen in her seat, surrounded by glitter, denial, and the ruins of her power. Tomorrow would bring the aftermath. Tonight belonged to truth. The hall emptied slowly, neighbors drifting out in clusters, still murmuring about everything they had just witnessed. The glitter that had spilled from Karen's dropped clipboard remained scattered across the floor, tiny, shimmering remnants of a power she no longer held. Karen herself sat motionless, staring at nothing, as if the walls she'd built over years had collapsed too fast for her mind to catch up. Elias didn't stay to watch her unravel. He stepped out into the cold night air, the door shutting softly behind him. The courtyard was quieter now that the voices had dispersed, but the stillness felt different, lighter, stripped of the tension that had weighed on everyone for so long. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Officer Myrak caught up with him near the walkway. "You all right?" she asked, her tone part professional, part human. "I'm fine," he said. And for the first time since this began, it was true. She nodded. "We'll process everything first thing tomorrow, but the community did something important tonight. They didn't just witness the truth, they accepted it. They needed to see it," he replied. She clasped a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. "Get some rest. You've earned it." He watched her leave before making his way across the courtyard. The lights from windows glowed softly, and a few neighbors who lingered outside offered quiet nods of respect. No fear, no suspicion, recognition. When he stepped inside his apartment, the familiar warmth hit him immediately. Mara let out a soft cry from her bassinet, sensing his presence even before he reached her. He scooped her up gently, holding her close, inhaling the faint baby scent that had become his anchor through all of this. Her tiny fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt. "It's done," he whispered. "You're safe." The words carried a finality he hadn't dared speak until now. He rocked her slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing with each breath. After a while, she drifted back to sleep. He placed her down carefully, then sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees, staring at her small, peaceful face. She had no idea what battles had been fought for her, no idea what someone had tried to steal from her. And one day, maybe he'd tell her. But not yet. Not until she could understand what truth and loyalty meant. A soft knock pulled him from the quiet moment. He opened the door to find Mrs. Dunley holding a small knitted blanket in her hands. "Thought she might like this," she said gently. He accepted it. "Thank you." "You did good tonight," she added with a warm, knowing smile. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He nodded. "Have a good night." "You too, dear." When he closed the door, he placed the blanket beside Mara's bassinet, smoothing the edges. The violet Mrs. Dunley had given him earlier that week still sat on the dining table, a symbol of support he hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. For the first time since all this began, the apartment felt like home again. Not a place under suspicion or attack, but a safe haven for him and his daughter. He cleaned up the evidence on the table, storing everything in a neat folder that he would hand over to Myrak in the morning. Then he walked to the window, looking out over the courtyard. Lights flickered off one by one as families settled into their night, no longer under the shadow of Karen's scrutiny. She would face consequences, real ones. The system she had manipulated for years would now be used to hold her accountable. And while Elias didn't take pleasure in her downfall, he felt a deep, quiet vindication. Not for himself, for Mara. Everything he'd done, every calm response, every calculated silence, every piece of evidence, had been for her safety, her dignity, her future. He walked back to the bassinet, brushing a thumb across her tiny hand. "No one will ever decide your truth for you," he murmured. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the courtyard trees. The night felt like a chapter closing, the kind that leaves a lingering sense of peace instead of dread. He turned off the living room light, leaving only the soft glow of Mara's night lamp. The gentle hum of the apartment filled the silence, steady, comforting. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, statements, and whatever fallout remained. But tonight was quiet. Tonight was victory. Tonight was a father protecting what mattered most. He sat beside the bassinet until fatigue finally pulled at him. When he stood and looked at Mara one last time, she stirred slightly, as if sensing the shift in him, the return to calm after countless storms. He whispered, "Sleep well, little one. We're safe now." And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. She tightened the zipper on my daughter's neck until she passed out. My DA. Husband proved it was premeditated. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?